Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today I've got a new tutorial for you from my latest book, the Paneling Quilt Workshop. It has a ton of great panel quilt ideas, including how you can transform any standard size panel into a size where you can put any 12-inch block going around it, as well as lots of great home decor projects you can make with your kids, bags, all kinds of goodies to inspire you to use those panels, because we know we like to collect them, but we don't always know what to do with them. We've got lots of videos to go with the book, including how I shop when I'm buying things from panels, as well as giving you guys some permission on how to cut them up beyond what their original purpose was in order to get something truly fun and unique to you for your panel quilt. This first one I'm doing is going to be the vertical quilt. So this is the instructions where if you get any standard size panel that measures 24 inches wide by width of fabric, you're going to be able to add some borders onto this and get it to measure 24.5 inches by 48.5 inches tall, which is what's going to fit any 12-inch block going around it. And there's instructions in the book on all your fabric sizes, what we're trimming down to, what size your borders need to be. I highly recommend checking out the book Block Genius to get some ideas on blocks that you can use to go with this, as well as all the math you need to make it the size you want. So that's a great resource to use in companion with this book. But first, I'm going to show you how I trim down my panels. Now, this is just how I received the panel. Hopefully you have someone when you got it from the quilt shop where they opened it up. So like when fabric is on the bolts, it's going to be folded over like this. And in the doubling process, when the fabric is going from on a roll, which is how it's produced in the factory, to folded over into and wrapped around bolts, a lot of times the fabrics kind of shift over a little bit. So one thing that you want to do if you're getting it in store is make sure that whoever is cutting it opens up the fabric so that they can cut straight down the center, so that way you don't end up with a cockeyed panel. Now, I know that sometimes this doesn't always work for us. I definitely got some side eye when I asked a quilt shop owner to do this for me, and not everybody does it just out of habit. But that's step number one. If you're in store, make sure they're cutting it one width at a time. Now, because this is printed, sometimes it's not straight. And that's normal. Like if we can't get it square, that's going to be okay. You can pick a fabric that is close to the edges for your borders to kind of make that not look like you've messed it up, or you can cut in a little, which is what we're going to do here. So the first thing I'm going to do is line up my selvage edges. And when I do that, you can see when I turn it sideways, it's not square. So what I really need to do is develop a square edge. So first thing I'm going to do is take a few measurements. So I want to measure how wide the actual print is, because this one is kind of bordered by a little bit of black. And I need to cut this down to 22.5 inches, which looks like I'm going to be able to do just fine because it measures just over 22.5 inches from where the top of my panel is to where kind of my black border is here. So now that I know that for sure, I'm going to create myself a straight edge going along this edge here. Now, this is not something where I'm just going to cut a whole width of fabric all at one time. When I get started, I am actually going to line it up so that way I can kind of get myself square. So I'm using the bottom selvage as a point. It's not square, it's definitely moving a little bit, but that's all right. So I've got it now situated to where 22.5 is just inside where the black begins, and I've got the same going on over here. I can probably scooch it over just a little bit. So now I can take my rotary cutter and I'm just going to cut a little bit. And by doing it this way, just a teeny bit at a time for your first cut, you're going to make sure that the design that you like and that you fell in love with is going to remain centered and you're not going to kind of get off. So now I'm moving this up a little bit more, and you can see I haven't gone all the way up. I've got about 2.5 inches, still nice and in line with the edge that I just cut, and then I'm also able to make sure over here that I'm still nice and straight. And so I'm going to keep doing this, going all the way up. So now that we have a nice cut edge over here on the right side, that's something that I can line up. So I'm going to just go ahead and flip it over so that my cut edge is now on the left, and I'm going to line up these edges so that they are super straight right on top of each other. Now I'm going to scooch this over carefully so that my cut edge with those fabrics lined up on top of each other is even with the 0-inch mark of my board. And now that I've smoothed everything out, I'm able to take my ruler and line it up on the 22.5-inch mark on my mat. Here you can see I've got the 22.5 lined up on here. It looks the same on the bottom, so I'm able to do this in one cut. So now what I'm able to do is I'm able to cut my height. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before, where keeping these edges nice and aligned, I'm going to turn it so that my fold of my fabric is even with that 0-inch. And now I'm able to cut half of my vertical measurement in order to have a nice squared off top. So again, I'm lining that up with the mat, and I'm able to make that in one cut. And now we have a panel with square edges on all sides, and everything is nice and centered within the panel with no goofy bits poking out on the edges. So again, even if it's not super square when you get it, this is the process you want to go through in order to get it like that. Now, one thing I want to point out here is, as I mentioned before, there is black going around in the borders. Now, this up here, this little black rim that did not get cut off, it's the same on the bottom. It is maybe a little bit wider than a 1/4 inch, so you probably are going to see a hint of it when it goes out to the border. So what I've done for that is I've chosen a border that is also black, and it is not the same black that's made by the manufacturer, so there might be a little bit of color variation, but it is going to be close enough to where you really aren't going to be able to tell in the grand scheme of things. If you've been watching me for any length of time, you know I really don't love to pin, but I am going to for this one because I want to make sure that my edges are nice and in alignment and that we maintain that nice straight edge when we add on our borders. For this one, I'm going to start with my side borders. They are pretty skinny, and I'm going to start by pinning my corners first. And then what I like to do is take my edges and spread it out and kind of walk my hands into the center, and that's where I'm going to put my pin in. You also could press the centers of each one of them, and that would give you a mark to aim for, but from there I just kind of bisect it until I feel like I have enough pins for my comfort level. So for example, I've got this half that I'm working with, so I'm going to put one at the 1/4 and then at the 1/8 marks, again making sure that all my edges are nice and in alignment so that everything stays nice and square. And I think this is enough pins for me on this side. I'm going to go ahead and do my other half, plus go ahead and pin to the other side of the panel so I can get both of my sides done at the same time, save a little bit of time. Now I'm just going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam, just like you would any other quilting project. Now I'm going to press those seams open. In order to do that, I put the nose of my iron straight down the center of the seam, and then I use about 3 fingers pressed down ahead of it to kind of pre-press that seam open. I almost always press my seams open, and there are reasons I do it for each different type, but for long strips like this, sometimes when you are pressing to the side, they can kind of curve as you go, and if you do it this way, you're going to maintain a nice straight line the entire way down, which is exactly what we want for a border. When I'm pressing seams open, once I finish pressing from the back side, I also will press from the front side to get that really nice and flat. All right, so now we're gonna add our top and bottom borders. And one thing you're gonna notice right away is that our top and bottom border is significantly thicker than our side border. That's because we didn't need to add a whole lot of width to get to 2.5 feet, but we do need to add a little bit of height in order to get to 4.5 feet so that we can pair any 12-inch finish block with our center panel. Just like before, I'm gonna start with my corners. I'm gonna make sure everything lays nice and flat and work my hands in to make sure I'm evenly distributing that. And then at each quarter, and when you're done, make sure to repeat everything with the bottom. Now we're gonna join our top and bottom borders with a 1/4-inch seam. And now we're gonna press those seams open. And now we have turned our quilt panel into a nice centerpiece for our quilt that measures 24.5 inches wide by 48.5 inches tall. So we can put any 12-inch finished block around it. 12-inch finish means it's 12.5 inches before you sew your blocks together, by the way. Now, you really can do anything you want from here. If you are looking for something that you can create quickly for a gift, or maybe something seasonal and you want to actually use it this year, you can go as simple as a 9-patch. And I do have that as an option for another quilt in this book. For this one, I really wanted to use this star and celestial center to pick a theme for the blocks. So I repurposed the blocks from my individual quilt pattern, star sign. And that one, the block finished at 11 inches. And so I needed to make a little bit of an adjustment, add a couple more strips to it. But I really like the idea of having different size stars kind of sparkling in the night and being able to have a fade of fabric. So if you want to make it just like the way I've done it, you absolutely can do this. The instructions for it, including how to do it with a fade, are in there. If this is not your jam and you just want to make sure that you can make any quilt to go around it, you can use the instructions in here and then follow along with how many blocks you need to make to get the quilt size that you're looking for. The one I'm doing is going to be for a lap. So I'm going to show you how to do the block that I've made with it, but if you are not going to be making this block, you can absolutely stop the tutorial here and use the information here and in the book, which has all the measurements for your borders, that to make this work for you. Again, that book is called Paneling Quilt Workshop. So for this block, I'm going to use 4-to-time flying geese. This is also called no waste flying geese. It's a really efficient way to make flying geese, and in my experience, it is the most accurate way to make flying geese so that everything turns out the way it should. So I'm going to start by turning over my 4 little squares. These are going to form the little wings of our geese. I'm turning them over, and you can notice that I put them kind of on a diagonal because what I need to do is take a marking tool, and really anything will work for this, except I would not use a permanent marker and I would not use a pen. So this is a friction gel pen. It's meant to go away with heat. Pencil also works good for this, or a white chalk pencil if you're having trouble seeing on a darker fabric like this one. But what I'm doing is I'm lining up the edge of my little ruler with the top and bottom of my fabric, and I am marking that from point to point. What we're going to do is we're going to sew down both sides of this with a scant 1/4-inch seam, and that is going to create sort of a half square triangle that will eventually become the wing of the flying geese. Now I'm going to do that on both sides, and I found, I don't know if you guys have always struggled with this or not, sometimes when you're marking these for half square triangles or whatever it is you're making, you find that the bias likes to stretch a little on you. And I found that if you are working on a softer surface like a pressing mat like this one, it's more likely to stay in place. And it's really important that you mark right to the tip of where these are, because I've saw so many people not mark to the tip and they think they'll fix it when they're sewing, but our brains just want to follow a line. So make sure you're going straight out to the point of those corners. So now we're going to take 2 of these. This is a couple step process here. And I'm going to line them up with the top corner here. And I am going to pin this for now so you guys can see how it works. I do not pin these in general because I have made so many of these for over a decade's time. I've been using this method of making flying geese. So I do not need to pin anymore. But if you are going to pin near the top corner going across the line that we drew. And then we're going to pin at the bottom corner also going across the line that we drew. So ideally what we want to have is these lines that we drew overlapping with each other in the center, and your bottom corner is always going to be on top like it is here. So if you're concerned about this, you can pin right into this, catching both sides and both corners as they overlap and come together, and that will allow you to go right up and down both of those. Again, this is not something that I do. I just lay them on in place as I'm going, and then I can have a large stack of my big squares and a large stack of my little squares. But if you're just doing this for the first time, this is a really good way to master it. Now I'm setting my sewing machine to a scant 1/4 inch seam. On my machine, that just means I need to press a button to move my needle one needle width to the right toward that seam side. You're definitely going to want to try to figure that out on your own machine, because we want just the teeniest little extra bit of wiggle room when we make these. All right, so once I get started, I can go ahead and pull that pin. And I'm just lining the edge of my presser foot up with the line that I drew here, the same way we would line it up with the edge of fabric if we were sewing a regular seam. When you get down to the end, make sure you are maintaining that scant 1/4 inch seam all the way to the point, otherwise you tend to have smiley or frowny faces depending on how you're feeling. And then what you want to do is you want to flip everything around, and again, you can chain piece these, so you do not need to do this all one at a time. I'm just doing one at a time for the video. And we're going to sew down the other side of that drum. So here's a good time to do a quality check. What we want is for our seam to be between 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 inch, and if it is, then that is perfect. If it is more than 1/2 of an inch, then your math isn't going to work right for putting your piece together. But right in the middle of that is absolutely fabulous. It means that we are going to have that scant 1/4 inch seam and just the teeniest bit of wiggle room for trimming down. You also want to kind of make sure that it's laying flat. If it's kind of curling up on the edges or kind of pulling to one side or another, it means that you've done something wrong here, and you want to make sure that you have it correct and nice and flat before you move forward. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut on that drawn line. Now, we already have the accuracy in the seam from sewing it, but so you don't have to be like perfectly on the line as you trim, but you also don't want to have too skinny of a seam. If it's less than 1/8 of an inch deep, that is going to pop open with use, or even just putting it on a long arm to be quilted, so we don't want that. So the next thing I'm going to do is press these seams open. And I am a huge proponent of pressing seams open whenever you're doing triangles, because then we don't lose a teeny bit of fabric as we press it open. And that can sometimes lead to your triangles being just a little bit too small. And that can lead to some of that frustration when you are making flying geese. All right, so I'm going to take my remaining 2 squares and we are going to line them up even with the corner of the bottom edge of our larger triangle, and the line should be going straight through the center. Now, when we sew this, if we have a perfect scant 1/4 inch seam, it should be coming in right where this little valley is created. So we're going to stitch all the way down and come back up and come out of the valley on the other side. That's what we're aiming for. And again, you could pin this if you want. This is not something that I pin before I get started. I just line up these corners down here and then stitch along both sides. I am still using that scant 1/4 inch seam at this step. I'm going to stitch all the way down that first one. And I kind of hold my finger to the side there to make sure I keep that scant 1/4 inch seam nice and straight down the edge. And then when you're done, you can lift up your presser foot, slide the next one in, and go from there. We're going to go ahead and flip that around and stitch the other way. Again, this is a good time to double check that we are between that 3/8 and 1/2 inch for our seam allowance. I am on this one, so I am good to go. I'm going to go ahead and cut again on that drawn line, making sure not to get either seam too skinny. We want to have it close to that scant 1/4 inch seam on both sides. All right, for these as well, we're gonna press our seams open. I like to go from one side on that diagonal and then just hit the whole thing on top just to get it nice and flat. All right, now it is time to trim this down. And while you see me sitting a lot on here, it is literally because that's what fits in the top to bottom of the screen. But whenever I'm actually doing trimming like this, I stand up to do it because then I can have my face positioned over what I am trimming and I get a lot better results. So I'm going to give you guys that tip as well. I did try to do everything sitting when I was very, very pregnant with my second child, and even I couldn't get the results that I was used to. So this is a tip I highly recommend to anyone. Just stand up for this part. This particular unit, I need to trim down to 2 inches by 3.5 inches. And you'll notice I don't have a lot of room up there. That is not going to measure a full 1/4 inch. That is more like 1/8 of an inch there. But it'll be okay. We'll make it work. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of lining up with the top so I can get as much of that point as possible in the seam allowance. And then I'm kind of moving it around so that I can get the edge where 2 inches is even with my 45-degree angle here. And then ideally I want the same thing to be happening over here. Right now I can't adjust too much because that's all underneath the ruler, but this edge looks good and the top edge looks good. The top edge, I'm really just going to be cutting off that dog here. All right, so we're going to flip that around. And now I'm going to line up that 3.5 inch with the edge and then the 2 inch with the edge that I just trimmed down. Now, ideally, we want this 45-degree line to be going straight out to the edge. That'll keep our point where it needs to be. And you'll notice I'm not exactly perfect, but it's pretty dang close. I'm good with that. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that. And then also you can see here the 3.5 where that is hitting the edge. That's also where this 45-degree line is going. So I'm going to give that a trim too. You want to make sure you have a sharp blade when you do this, because if you have a dull one, it can kind of push the fabric out and then you don't have a really good hold on it anymore. So we can see this looks a heck of a lot better than it did pre-trim. And I'm going to go ahead and do this with the rest of them, and then we are going to be ready to put our center block together. So from here it gets a little easier. We're just going to be sewing our rows together across and then joining them, so it gets pretty simple from here. I have returned back to a 1/4 inch seam for this step. Now when I get to this section, I want to sew just to the seam side of where that little point is, even though it's a tight seam, because I don't want to cut off my point, and that will help make sure everything works out right. Now when I'm pinning like this, what I do is I always keep the flying geese side up. That way when I'm sewing, I can sew just to the seam side of where those points come together. And for pinning the seams that have been pressed open, I line it up so that the seams are right on top of each other, and then I pin in the right side of that seam allowance right across where I'm going to sew. That keeps everything in alignment and we'll get some great joins. All right, so now we're going to give this a final press. I do a lot of lifting and pressing at this point because I do not want to press any of those seams going in a direction it's not supposed to go. And I will just kind of leave my iron in place over all of these seams here, so I especially get this one nice and flat. Now when I'm all done, you take a spray mister. You can get these from beauty supply stores, and it just sprays a fine mist of water over your block. And this way I'm able to get the effects of steam without actually using steam. And to me, that works a lot better for getting everything where I want it to be. And especially with trying to get this block as flat as we possibly can for the quilting stage, this is really a great step. You can see how much flatter it is now. And we were able to get some good points out of that, even though we had an issue with those points being a little bit too close to the edge. So A lot of quilting is knowing how and when to fudge it. This is an example of how and when you're going to do that. And speaking of how and when to fudge it, this center block I accidentally spelled a full beer on while I was making it and prepping for the video. So it is a little wonky. Now again, if you really like this pattern, it is available in my book, and that is called the Paneling Quilt Workshop. And it's got lots of ideas on what you can do with panels, and including one like this where you're able to turn any panel in order to be able to fit 12-inch finished blocks going all around it. And the instructions for how I did this, including this gradient of fabric coming out, are in there. I chose my largest star here to demonstrate this part for you because they're all the same. They just start with a smaller and smaller size block for our center, and then we're going to add on different strips. We're always going to start at the bottom and then move to the side and work our way down. So I'm just going to do that, sew and stitch, press, and sew and stitch, press until we have our entire block together. For this first one only, I like to sew with the block up. That way I can sew just to the side of where my points are, so that way I don't lose any points to the log cabin rows. Now, because this is the most critical part of the entire process where we have some points going under, I am going to go ahead and just spritz those seams and go over that with the iron just to get them nice and flat before I continue on adding my log cabin strips. And from here on, it's pretty easy. We're just going to add bottom side, bottom side. Now for my final step before I am ready to assemble the quilt top, I like to take each block and spritz the whole thing with my spray mister and then just go over it with iron to get everything to lay nice and flat. I find it really helps prep everything for that final quilt assembly. From here, everything is pretty easy. I have already assembled my left and my right columns, so I'm going to attach those to the sides of my panel. Everything should be the same size at this point and be that 48.5 inches tall. All right, so I've got both of my side rows attached, which makes it now wide enough to add my top and bottom rows. All right, so here we have it. We've got our panel surrounded by our border to make it 2 foot by 4 foot, and then we can add any 12-inch block around it to get a finished quilt. I made a lap size for this project, but there are lots of other sizes that you can make, and you can get all of the number of blocks you would need in order to do that and the finished sizes in my latest book, the Paneling Quilt Workshop. You can get it at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com, your local quilt shop, or anywhere quilting books are sold. Thanks so much for following along, and until next time, happy quilting!